Trump's Iran sanctions are still strangling that country, and until Biden is able to lift them, he's probably not going to get Iran to the table. Dr. Trita Parsi joins us to discuss the issue. Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. But first, Dr. Trita Parsi is with us. He's the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Been on the program many times over the years. An extraordinarily well-informed observer of the broadly the situation in the Middle East and with regard to Iran in particular. And Dr. Parsi, first of all, the website is quincyinst.org. And you can tweet Dr. Parsi at tparsi, P-A-R-S-I. Dr. Parsi, welcome back. I'm wondering if you could first just give us a shorthand kind of background on the situation with Iran from the deal that President Obama participated in, along with I believe it was 5 other nations in putting together, to Trump's blowing it up to where we're at right now, and then we can go forward with what's happening with Biden and this diplomacy. But just for those people who may not have been paying attention.
Sure. So for years, there's been tensions over Iran's nuclear program, and there was a major breakthrough in 2012, 2013 that laid the way for multilateral negotiations between the United States, Germany, France, the UK, Russia, China, and Iran. And 2015, they reached a landmark agreement that blocked all of Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon, and at the same time lifted sanctions on Iran, rehabilitated the country politically. It was hailed by all countries with the exception of 3, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE, 3 countries that incidentally have been pushing the United States to go to war with Iran. Trump comes in, he tears the agreement apart, walks out of it, reimposes sanctions on Iran, imposes further sanctions on Iran. After about a year, the Iranians start to reduce some of their obligations, and as a result, restarted elements of the program that they had kept dormant as a result of the deal. Biden comes in. He had promised that he would quickly get back into the agreement. It's part of the Democratic Party platform that there should be a quick rejoining of the nuclear agreement. We're 6 weeks into it. We have still not seen any clear gesture by the Biden administration to get back into the agreement. Instead, we're stuck on a rather childish fight as to who needs to take the first step, which is wasting very valuable time and is likely going to make the political cost and difficulty to get this deal up and running again all the more difficult.
Give us the details on that, who takes the first step dispute.
Well, so the Biden administration started messaging that they would get back into the deal if the Iranians reverse some of the steps that they have taken. The Iranians never left the deal. They've reduced some of their obligations. And Biden wants Iran to reverse all of those steps, be in complete compliance with the agreement before he takes any step at all.
You're talking their further enrichment of uranium, principally?
Enrichment of uranium, shipping out of that uranium, specific sites that have been closed, enrichment to higher levels, all kinds of different things that are very important that the Iranians have made very clear that they will reverse all of it, assuming that the U.S. goes back into the deal. And the Iranians are very worried, it seems like, because if they allow the United States to come back into the deal without lifting the sanctions that are actually violating the deal, and essentially continues to pursue Trump's maximum pressure strategy, then their fear is that if the talks then end up hitting a snag and not succeed and break down, they will be blamed for it, even though Biden actually never changed the policy of Trump. He continued to do exactly what Trump was doing, more or less, while getting the credit for simply wanting to talk, which Trump wanted to as well, but then the Iranians will get the full blame for it. So they've been resisting. Biden doesn't want to take the first step because he's afraid of looking weak and that Saudi Arabia and Israel and the UAE and Republicans will attack him. But at the same time, Biden did promise leadership, and leadership means taking the first step by definition. So there's an expectation that he would lead and take the first step now. And these issues, by the way, can be resolved easily behind the scenes. The problem is that once you make them public, which unfortunately the administration contributed to doing, then they become really tricky to resolve, because then it's all about saving political face.
Right, which takes us back to domestic politics. I believe Iran has a presidential election coming up this year, and certainly America is in a continuous cycle of political turmoil. To what extent are domestic politics driving these decisions on both sides?
Well, domestic politics is tremendously important, unfortunately, on both sides. The Iranians are in a tight situation. I mean, the Rouhani government only has a couple of effective months left. The elections are in June. By last 2 weeks of March, the Iranians are in an election season. As a result, cannot negotiate effectively. On this side, I think, unfortunately, the Biden administration seems to think that there is a way for them to strike a deal with Iran to actually get back into the JCPOA without paying a domestic political cost, without angering the Saudis and the Israelis and the UAE. And I simply don't think that's possible at all. I mean, Obama proved that it's not possible to do that. If you want this deal, you have to be ready to pay a political price for it. If you're not willing to pay the political price, then you shouldn't even pretend that you're interested in diplomacy.
What are you're talking about the Saudis, Israel, and the UAE. Biden has distanced himself from Netanyahu, who is, facing crises of his own as he's being prosecuted for corruption and other crimes. The Saudis, we just came out and pointed out that, Mr. Bonesaw ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And the UAE has, well, God only knows. I mean, certainly they played a big role with Jared Kushner's $1 billion. Why are we so concerned about those three countries in terms of pacifying them with regard to Iran?
I think it has a lot to do with how they can have an impact on domestic politics. But I want to say I absolutely agree with the premise of your question. It's a real question mark. Why are we willing to put their concerns and their interests and their preferences above the U.S.'s security interests? As Bill Clinton said after his first meeting with Netanyahu in 1996, who's the freaking superpower in this equation, in this relationship? Right. That seems to be a need of reminding here, because the Biden administration itself has said that this is a security imperative. We need to make sure that the Iranians don't have a pathway to a bomb. We need to avoid a war. And incidentally, perhaps even more importantly, the idea of striking this deal in order to avoid a war and avoid a weapon in Iran is absolutely imperative in order for the United States to be able to slowly but surely extract itself from the Middle East militarily, which is exactly what the American public wants. They don't want to have 58,000
We say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like.
The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled "Australia, There Will Be Blood," the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control. With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's Monday, tax day, Donald Trump in court day. A lot going on in the world today. In just a moment, we'll be talking with Jamal Abdi about the Iranian retaliation against Israel. After that, I want to get into some of the details on Trump's criminal hush money election interference trial. It's being referred to as a hush money trial by the media, but it's really about election interference. It's about Trump's attempt to fool voters about who he was leading up to the 2016 election. The prosecutor, by the way, just made a motion to hold Trump in contempt for violating a gag order. And the judge has ruled that Melania can't be told, the jury can't be told that Melania was pregnant during the affairs with Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, so, or whatever you want to call those things. We'll get to that in a few minutes. In the second hour of our program, can voter suppression hand the 2024 election to Donald Trump? We'll discuss that. Georgia and Texas in particular are up to some really skeezy stuff right now. And the neoliberal bullies have controlled the world long enough. We'll talk about that in the second hour. In the third hour, in the third hour, pardon me, voters want tax day to look different for billionaires. And the shady far-right wing threats to keep Biden off some state ballot. We've got two states now that just announced that Biden may not be on their ballots, Ohio and Alabama. I'll tell you about that in the third hour of the program. But to start out the program, we had, over the weekend, Iran attacked Israel with hundreds of drones and missiles and whatnot. On the line with us is Jamal Abdi, the president of the National Iranian American Council, NIAC Council, NIA Council.org is the website and also the Twitter handle. And J. Abdi, J-A-B-I is his Twitter handle. Jamal, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we talked. I've got to say my biggest concern about this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that Netanyahu is playing this thing like a fiddle. He attacked the Iranian embassy, which is sovereign territory, knowing that it was a violation of international law to do that. He absolutely broke international law. I believe he did that hoping for a response from Iran, which he now has. And I'm concerned that he's trying to drag America into a larger regional conflict just to distract, basically, America and the world from the mass death that he's caused in Gaza, and to keep himself out of jail, to hang on to his prime ministership. What say you?
Well, unfortunately, I strongly share that suspicion, and I'm not the only one. There are reports that even Joe Biden himself and the Biden administration believe that Netanyahu is trying to drag the United States into war. So this is not some fringe theory or some, anti-Israel talking point. The U.S. government itself is concerned that this is the case, and I think that does inform a lot of how they have navigated this issue. The degree of, I wouldn't say coordination per se, but the degree to which the U.S., I think, sort of ensured that this has been calibrated to not cross any so-called red lines that would then drag the U.S. into a regional war. I think it's very clear that's what Biden is trying to do. My concern is you see the writing on the wall, you see what Netanyahu has done so far, and the bear hug approach with the public diplomacy and sort of public alignment with Israel in hopes that in good faith Netanyahu is going to do the right thing and is going to be respectful of U.S. interests has not worked so far. And so I'm very concerned that none of what has happened is outside of what the Netanyahu government planned for. The strikes they engaged in, highly provocative, a clear violation of international law, completely predictable, if not completely expected, that Iran would have to respond in some way. So we're still in this realm sort of Netanyahu's creation, where the ball is now completely in his court to decide what he wants to do. And Biden has said the U.S. is not going to partake in any offensive measures, which I think is positive. But Biden has not said, we're not going to, we're actually going to oppose that. We actually, want to protect the region from a regional war, protect U.S. interests, protect U.S. troops. And so Netanyahu, take the win and stand down, not just take the win and do whatever you want. And hopefully the guy operates in good faith. That's not what we've seen so far.
You are far more familiar with and much more a scholar of that region than am I. I'm curious your thoughts on a worst case scenario.
I think that
and
the
a
worst case scenario.
for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I think the worst case, we're talking about 30,000 people who have already been killed, 30,000 Palestinians, 13,000 children, a famine that is happening with the use of U.S. weapons. I can't think of, it's hard to think of even worse case scenarios than that. But the prospect, I think, of this becoming, Israel responds in a way that sort of all pretenses of this being what it is now, which is sort of these choreographed responses to kind of hew to the red lines and not cross those lines. If that comes off and there is a regional war and you've got Hezbollah going all in and you've got, Iranian linked actors in Iraq and Syria and Yemen going all in. I mean, we're talking about a regional conflagration, right. And we've got U.S. troops in the region who are sitting ducks.
Yeah, for sure. How would the Arab nations in the Gulf respond to, if for example, Israel takes out an Iranian nuclear power plant, or the Iranian nuclear, where it's believed that they're developing nuclear weapons. It's kind of a logical place for Israel to strike. If they did that, and then Iran responded by a massive bombardment of Israel, or activating Hezbollah or whatever, and then boom, these two countries are actually in a shooting war. How are the Arab countries in that region going to respond?
They have tried to, I think, protect their own interests, which is what you would ask of a state. So they, most of the Arab states condemned the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and so I think signaled to Iran that they are not joining with Israel as part of this. I think they notably did not condemn the Iranian response. However, they may or may not have provided intelligence to Israel to try to mitigate the damage of that response. And I think what the Saudis and UAE and others really are doing is trying to navigate this without themselves getting sucked into this war, and really mindful of, there was a period of time sort of during the Trump administration and just before where I think the sense that the United States was going to fight a war for the Persian Gulf Arab states, or was going to intervene, that was dispelled. It was dispelled partially from the nuclear deal, where you had the United States saying, no, we are going to engage Iran, and the states need to figure out how to share the region together, and we're not going to just play one side or the other. But then really, with Trump's abandonment of the nuclear deal and some of the Iranian responses to that, the attacks on the Saudi Aramco facility, some of the ship seizures, and the fact that the United States did not get involved, I think signaled to the Arab states kind of a degree of, you have to take responsibility for this because the United States is not going to bail you out. And so I think that's what they're doing, trying to avoid getting sucked into one direction or the other. Now, if this plays out, there are many different pathways it could take. And I think the other, worst case scenario that I wanted to mention is just that, Iran is on the cusp of having the ability to break out and develop nuclear weapons. And I think that there are a fair number, maybe even an increasing number of, voices inside of Iran who think that, that it would be a wise decision, that this whole situation exposes the need for a deterrence, and what better deterrence than a nuclear weapon. So I think there are a lot of ways Iran could potentially take this, and the effect that would have on the rest of the region remains to be seen, how the Arab states would respond to Iran breaking out and deciding it wants to go nuclear.
I get it. We're talking with Jamal Abdi, the president of the National Iranian American Council, NIAC. Jamal, we're going to hit a hard break here in about a minute and a half that I can't control, so just FYI. I'm wondering how, what are the domestic politics of this for Iran?
Well, I think that the government of Iran is beleaguered, sort of facing the greatest legitimacy crisis it has had in the existence of the Islamic Republic. They just had an election with record low turnout. And I think that, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but I think that for ordinary Iranians, there's really this, there's a fear of war, but there's also a sense of the economy is in such peril. Everyday life is just increasingly difficult. And there's not a desire for a big war to break out. And there's not I think there are some who think there will not be a rally around the flag effect because of the disenchantment with the government. But I think some of the signs that we're seeing is that, in fact, an all-out war probably would actually enable this beleaguered government to really reconsolidate power. And already we're seeing...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, we're seeing a renewed crackdown on the hijab, the enforcement of the hijab, which, folks who are going to Iran right now are saying, wow, most women are not wearing hijab anymore. The state claims this is illegal, but is not enforcing it. And now they're returning to this. And I think returning to some of these, basically using the external crisis to crack down internally and sort of ensure that they've consolidated power. So I really think that is the direction things
we've got really weak mullahs and we've got really weak Netanyahu, both of them with astonishingly low popularity ratings. And if either country was, arguably fully democratic, somebody else would be running both of them, it seems. These are just going to be, could be just kind of last-ditch efforts to hang on to power on both sides, right?
I think that's a really astute analysis.
Yeah, okay. Jamal Abdi, the president of the National Iranian American Council. You can check it out, niacouncil.org on the internet. Jamal, thank you so much for dropping by. It's always great talking with you. I always learn something. Thank you.
My pleasure, Tom.
Thank you so much.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with all the details on Donald Trump's trial, which is underway in New York City right now. Stay with us. And welcome back, Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I just wanted to tell you and the audience, of course, the truth about what's going on in the Middle East, because I think there's things we're missing. But probably the quickest way to do it would be to, share my differences with, my old boss, John Bolton. Mm-hmm. All right. Ironically, mm-hmm. John Bolton says that Trump is incompetent to be president. I fully agree. All right, fully agree. Where I disagree is when John Bolton said, Joe Biden is also incompetent because he's expressing weakness. We need to attack Iran, and if we really want to get our message through, we have to attack the Iranian oil fields. Now, if I was talking to John Bolton, I strongly disagree. And he would say the same thing I'm about to tell you. He would say, Dave, this is about regime change. There's not going to be safety in the Middle East or the world unless we change the regime in Tehran. That's a fact. But here's the problem, Tom. The regime in Iran is like every autocratic regime, just like the Trump movement right now in the Republican Party. There's no difference. They rely on religious zealotry, all right, to capture hearts and minds, but to practically run the government, they rely on the 15 to 25% wealthy entrepreneurs. Mm. In the case of Iran, those oligarchs, those wealthy entrepreneurs, are oil magnates. They are very wealthy in oil. You attack that oil field, then the religious zealots will have no choice, but they will have nothing left. It will trigger World War III, more than likely. At the very least, it will be like Mr. Bolton says, it is regime change. And this, I think, is going to bring you to your topic. With regime change, in rush the neoliberals and the neocons. We've seen this before. I experienced it firsthand in Afghanistan and Iraq. We're not very good at it, Tom. Mm-hmm. We, being the United States, are not very good at it. You mix in this element of Christian, end of the world, apocalyptic zealotry, it'll be a disaster. Again, I think you will just have World War III again. You'll just have it again, but in another way.
Aren't we talking really about the higher probability, Dave, of a regional conflict, or that doesn't necessarily drag Europe, the United States, Russia, and China into it?
Well, what we're missing is the European factor. Okay.
Or do you think Russia will come to the aid of Iran?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, look, this thing in the Ukraine, we don't want to say it, we don't want to see it, but it is racism is behind it. Russia beat the Ukraine to the punch. All right, they beat them. Russia brought up the whole Nazi thing first, okay? But in reality, it is the Kremlin that is racist. The Kremlin on their southern border, all right? It were Tajiks that attacked the Moscow venue with Islamic terrorism. What's her name? The daughter, yes, the daughter of Nikita Khrushchev said it. Putin does not like the leader of Chechnya, no matter how it may look. The Kremlin wants a European sphere of influence. They don't want to go by regulation, though. They want, it is the rise of really just Nazism.
Dave, I'm out of time, but I totally get it. Dave, thank you so much. Good talking to you. 22 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. Welcome back. So Donald Trump this morning in front of the courthouse in New York went out and lied his teeth off. He's just lied his ass off, I guess is the phrase. The one thing that he said was true is that this is absolutely unprecedented. And never before has an American president been prosecuted, criminally prosecuted, for anything. Now, never before has America had a criminal as a president, with the single exception of Richard Nixon, who resigned to avoid criminal prosecution, just like his vice president, Spiro Agnew, did. Spiro Agnew had been taking bribes while in the White House. Nixon had been taking over $1 million in bribes. We know about the bribes from the milk lobby. We know about the bribes from Jimmy Hoffa. Cash. Jimmy Hoffa walked into the White House with $500,000 in a briefcase. The milk lobby brought Nixon $1 million, as I recall. Might have been a half. And there were apparently other bribes as well. That wasn't what Nixon got nailed for, of course. It was illegally wiretapping the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate. But Nixon set the model for modern-day Republican presidents. Nixon committed treason by blowing up the Vietnam peace talks in 1968 in order to become president. So then Reagan committed treason by cutting a deal with the Ayatollahs in Iran to hold the hostages, which crippled Jimmy Carter and led to Reagan being elected in 1980. And then George W. Bush was elected in 2000 after his brother removed 92,000 African Americans from the voting rolls, or 94,000. You'd have to ask Greg Palast for the exact number. He's the one who found it, from the voting rolls in Florida. And, so you've got another illegitimate Republican president. And, of course, Donald Trump lost by 3 million votes and only reached the White House because of help from Russia. So, there you go, 4 illegitimate Republican presidents. And, of course, their successors, Jerry Ford and George Herbert Walker Bush, only in office because of the illegitimate actions of their predecessors. So that was the one truth that Trump told. But you know what's going on here? This case, the details of it, pretty straightforward. And it is a big deal. In New York State, it is not illegal to. Well, it is illegal. Excuse me. It's not a felony to illegally mess with your books, to hide payments, for example, to a porn star as if they were business expenses. You typically don't go to jail for that. You pay huge fines for it. It's a misdemeanor. But if you do that in the furtherance of another crime, even if you're not being prosecuted for that crime, then it does become a felony. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Alvin Bragg doesn't have to prove the election interference part. I'll finish the story on the other side of this break and pick up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I will be keeping you up to date. I've got, we're monitoring the election, or the trial on a blow-by-blow basis. I'll keep you up to date throughout the entire 3 hours of the program.
America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the two murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascists salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in a few moments here, I'll pick up your calls at 202-224-3121. It remains to be seen. This hush money trial, or the election interference trial, is a really big deal. What I was explaining before is that under New York law, if you engage in shady bookkeeping practices, essentially, you know, I don't know, you take a vacation and you call it a business expense when it's, just you and your family having fun or something like that, you can be prosecuted, and routinely people are prosecuted for that, but it's only a misdemeanor. I say only a misdemeanor. There are substantial, there can be huge fines, and there's substantial penalties associated with that misdemeanor, but it's basically just a misdemeanor. And that's what Donald Trump did here, is what he's accused of is that David Pecker brought him this story that Stormy Daniels had come to. David Pecker was the publisher of the National Enquirer at the time. And Stormy Daniels had come to David Pecker and said, hey, Donald Trump and I, had sex, and, I'm perfectly willing to go on the record and talk about it if you pay me for the story. And David Pecker paid her $15,000, if I'm remembering correctly. Now, that might have been Karen McDougal, but I'm pretty sure it was Stormy Daniels. And then handed this off to Donald Trump. and said, this woman is talking about, you know, going public with this. And he never published her story. And she wrote it up, by the way. She wrote up a story for the National Enquirer, and Pecker never published it. So when Trump learned about this, he had his fixer, Michael Cohen, reach out to Stephanie Clifford, you know, Stormy Daniels, and say, you know, we would like to pay you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, to no longer ever again for the rest of your life, you know, world without end, amen, speak about the fact that you had sexual intercourse with Donald Trump while his wife was pregnant and while he was, well, in the years preceding his run for president. And she took the money. You know, she took the $160,000 from Donald Trump via Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen wrote her a check out of his own personal account so that it wouldn't reflect on Trump. And then Trump wrote Michael Cohen a check for $450,000, which was supposed to cover that $160,000, may have been to also cover the same amount of money for Karen McDougal, and also to cover the taxes that Michael Cohen was going to have to pay, because that money coming into Michael Cohen would be considered income. So Trump reimbursed him in a big way, in a way that, you know, even covered the taxes. And that's the tax crime that New York State is going after him on. Now, the allegation that Alvin Bragg is making is that the reason Donald Trump did this was all, keep in mind, this was all in the 3 or 4 weeks before the election of 2016. And the reason that Stormy Daniels first reached out to David Pecker, and the reason that Donald Trump was all freaked out about this, was because a couple of weeks before the election, the Access Hollywood tape came out, where Donald Trump said, you know, when you're a star, you can grab them by the, you know, what's it, and, you know, they let you do it. And that, you know, really hurt his reputation. I mean, the whole GOP, at that point, he was, you know, clearly the presidential nominee. They couldn't do anything about it, but you know, the whole party kind of took a deep breath and said, whoa, and a number of people, a number of Republicans just kind of backed away from him for a week or so. So he knew that if right after the Access Hollywood tape came out, Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels were to come out and say, oh, and we slept with the guy, and he gave us $160,000. And now, you know, Stormy Daniels has embellished it even further with, yeah, and he's only 3 inches long and, you know, et cetera. So that now becomes election interference. Now, election interference is a crime, both a federal crime and a state crime in New York State. As far as I know, Alvin Bragg is not actually charging Donald Trump with election interference. What he's charging him with is these bookkeeping crimes around the money that was used to pay off these women in furtherance of this felony crime of election interference. And so, you know, doing the bookkeeping crimes in order to facilitate an actual felony is a felony. You know, so it's sort of like, you know, conspiracy to commit a felony is a felony. So that's what's going on with that. He's facing 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Those 34 counts are not separate incidents. These are all, right now, these all have to do with Stormy Daniels. And what they are the, you know, essentially the kind of the 34 stages in the process of paying off people and paying off Michael Cohen and having that money, you know, cycled through the Trump organization, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all the steps that he took basically to hide. He's accused of faking a series of invoices to Cohen, saying that they were for legal services instead of reimbursement for hush money. Trump is alleged to have issued a series of checks to Cohen, which he falsely denoted as payment for legal services. And then finally, prosecutors say that Trump then caused false entries about the payments to be created in the Trump Corporation's general ledger. So these are the crimes that he's being charged with. But they will be also talking about Karen McDougal as a way of telling the jury, you know, this isn't just a one-off. This guy does this and did this in order to prevent people from knowing about it so that he could win the 2016 election. And prosecutors don't have to prove that Trump actually committed the election interference crime or any other crime. All they have to do is prove that when Trump falsified the business records, he did it, and this is a quote from the charging documents. He did it, quote, with intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof. And I said Cohen was given $450. He was given $420,000. My error. Sorry about that. I always like to be right, accurate about things. The judge, by the way, this morning ruled that the Access Hollywood tape itself cannot be admitted into evidence. This was Trump had a substantial win this morning in this. Judge Merchan said that he believed that that tape itself would prejudice the jury against Donald Trump, would cause them to think poorly of him as a human being, in other words, independent of the crimes that he's charged with. And so he's going to allow the Access Hollywood tape to be read, the transcript of it to be read in open court. But he went along with Trump's lawyers and said that the tape itself cannot be played in court. Now, another one of the things that Trump is saying is that, nobody else gets charged like this. This has never happened before. He went off on that at some length. The judge noted, Judge Merchan, this morning noted that the prosecution showed the district attorney's office had brought approximately 437 cases charging falsification of business records in just the previous decade. The Washington Post found that from 2014 to 2023, prosecutors brought first-degree business records falsifications 11,663 times across the state of New York. And in that same period, the Manhattan district attorney had 42 cases where the falsification charge was the top one, and the defendant, like Trump, was not charged with any additional, more serious crimes. And then just in 3 days, from April 8th to April 10th, Trump filed 3 separate emergency appeals. All of them, he wanted a change of venue. He wanted the judge to be removed. He wanted the trial to be delayed until after the election. All those got turned down. And that was last Monday and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, he asked the appeal court again to delay the trial, and they turned that down. There's kind of an Al Capone feeling about this. Al Capone went down for tax evasion, not for the many murders that he did. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, the prosecutors this morning asked the judge to hold Trump in contempt of court for violating the gag order. Over the weekend, Trump again attacked the judge and his daughter. And so that will probably be debated today. We haven't seen that yet. And the judge also ruled this morning that the jury cannot be told that when Trump had the affair with Karen McDougal, which apparently lasted over a year, and the one-night stand with Stormy Daniels, that the jury cannot be informed that Melania was pregnant at the moment. So, what say you about all this? 202-808-9925 is our number. Mario in Chicago. Hey, Mario, what's on your mind today?
Sir, thank you very much for taking my call. In the last 2 years, I ditched my car. I have a very nice car, Lexus 350, very comfortable. But I find myself insulated, not talking to no one. So I ditched my car and I walk for everything. And I talk to everyone that I can, my doctors, my cardiologists, my nurses, everyone, bus drivers, people in the bus. But what strikes me and I find very challenging that I talk to 3 African-American young ladies, very smart. And they told me they were not going to vote for Mr. Biden. I just recommend to everyone that listen, get involved, ditch your car, walk, talk to people. It's amazing how many people they are not aware what's happening. But what strikes me the most, that these 3 African-American women, very smart, they say they're not doing nothing for us. They're doing everything for the people from the South. And you can see it. I mean, I tend to agree with them. But they're missing the big picture in here. So talk to everyone. Ditch your car. Go and talk to people. Because a friend of mine said, and I hear him 20 years ago, democracy is not a spectator sport. And it was not Barack Obama.
Well, Barack Obama said that, actually. It's where I got the phrase. Well, actually, I got the phrase from Bernie Sanders, but Barack Obama used to like to say it, too.
Well, now you give the credit to Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
But I tell you, Tom, sir, that I was a great great opportunity to have a job that I can come to my office and for 3 hours listen to you. And thanks to that, it gives me a lot of wisdom. Right now, I walk into my library and then I go to my hospital and Boston train, and I expect to talk to everyone that I can. One thing that surprised me very bad, when I was in the bus and I talked to the driver, and I told about Mr. Biden, this couple, blind couple, handicapped people, when I say about Mr. Biden, they laugh very loud, like making fun of me. They do not know that that bus, empty bus, is running thanks to Democrats.
Yeah.
The handicap of them, they are benefited because of Democrats. And I hope I explained myself.
Yeah, well, I good on you, Mario. This is what we all need to be doing, is playing evangelist wherever and whenever we can. And thanks for sharing your story. That's a great one. Mario, thank you so much for the call, too. We'll continue with your calls in just a moment. It's 47 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. Keeping track of the trial. They're on a break again. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week right here. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Mark in Colombia, South America. Hey, Mark. Been a long time since I was in Colombia. How's everything and what's up?
Oh, it's fantastic down here, retired down here, kind of looking at things from afar. President Truman gave a speech one time during a presidential campaign, and afterwards this woman came rushing up to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Truman, you're so fabulous. You have the vote of every thinking American." And Truman replied, "I'm sorry, madam, that's not enough. I need a majority." So I think that's...
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought I'd just give you a little lift here in these warm times. And it does look glum here from South America, I tell you. Well, I mean, I hate to beat a dead horse, no pun intended, but I think Joe Biden really did a disservice by deciding to run again at the age of 81. I think it was a selfish thing to do, to be honest, and I think it was a narcissistic thing to do. If he had stepped aside, like he kind of intimated he would at the beginning of his term, and let the Democrats have a wide-open primary with about 3 or 4 or 5 maybe really good candidates, and whoever came out of that would be so strong and a fresh face and no baggage, this election wouldn't even be close. We wouldn't even be talking about this right now.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be close.
I don't disagree with your analysis, Mark, but that's not what we have right now. So that was a good conversation to have 6 months ago, but it's kind of, that's in the past. That argument's day is past. Unless you want to punish Biden for it by electing Trump.
Not in a million years. But one thing, and I'll just bring this up. 1968, when LBJ came out with his now famous "I will not seek nor will I accept the nomination of my party."
That was not his choice. The Democratic Party forced that on him.
Well, that's my point. Why aren't the Democrats? Here we got Hillary Clinton on the late night show last week when she was asked about the two choices and how everybody's unhappy about it. And her snide comment was, "Well, just get over yourself." It's this kind of attitude by the regulars in the Democratic Party that turns a lot of the base off. They haven't learned a thing. She hasn't learned a thing since 2016.
But she's not running for political office anymore.
Yeah, I know, but why say that? Why make a comment like that?
No, I get it. I would have loved to have seen Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom have a debate and go at it. I mean, I think a Democratic primary would have been a good thing. On the other hand, Joe Biden has been doing a kick-ass job. I am concerned about his age. He'll be 85 when his term ends. He's so far he's pretty peppy. He's doing a hell of a lot more than I probably could. So, I tip my hat to him.
But it's too close for comfort, though. I mean, honestly, and I know these polls 7 months out or 6 months out, take it with a grain of salt. But it shouldn't, here's a guy going through a felony trial.
In 2008, at this point in the election, Barack Obama was losing also. Although Joe Biden now in the polling has pulled ahead of Donald Trump in almost every poll, substantially ahead of Donald Trump.
True.
The big challenge is going to be these voter suppression efforts in Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Wisconsin, even, you know, where you've got a Republican legislature. Mark, I'm out of time, but thank you for the call and the conversation. It's 9 minutes before the hour, and we'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Paul in Neenah, Wisconsin. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, concerning the Alvin Bragg Trump trial, that's I call it the tush money trial. I looked at the questions that there's a PDF file of the questions being asked of the jurors, and a couple of them stood out to me in a bad way. The least of them is number 36. The defendant in this case has written a number of books. Have you read or listened to audio of any one or more of these books? If so, which ones? I don't think Trump really wrote any books. I don't ask Tony Schwartz, The Art of the Deal. I mean,
yeah, but that's
Trump. Maybe
that is not unusual for public figures. I mean, George W. Bush's book, A Charge to Keep, was written by a ghostwriter.
I think maybe some jurors might think, though, that Trump's also this literary genius all of a sudden, but I felt it was kind of skewed a little bit. But the one that got me, though, and I think of your dad when I see stuff like this. You talked of your dad, going into with World War II. It says, number 30, have you ever considered yourself a supporter or belong to any of the following? The QAnon movement, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, 3%ers, Boogaloo Boys, and there's that 6-letter word that George Carlin never, ever uttered, Antifa.
Right.
They're lumping Antifa with this.
You know, what's surprising is they didn't add Black Lives Matter to that.
I'm laughing here like a fool. I always say when they talk Antifa, I always say June 6th, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. Yeah. The forces of Antifa landed, and you talked a number of times about your dad regarding this kind of stuff. But see that when something becomes weaponized. Now I'm going to ask you something about the word liberal. I try to use myself and try to have others use the word progressive instead. Through the years, I've asked people that are, political or not even that political, to define liberal. And they'll say things like, well, anything goes, or you do what you want, whatever feels good. And, it can have a negative connotation about it.
Well, and Rush Limbaugh has spent the better part of 2 decades trashing that word, which is when Bill Clinton stopped calling himself a liberal.
Yeah, there you go. I even saw, things get ingrained. I was watching a video a while back on a YouTube clip. These are 2 diehard atheists talking about God, and they said the word he more than once.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Because that's baked into this God.
Right, which raises, the question, does God have a gender? Does God have a penis? I think not. But,
I definitely think not.
Or if so, probably it's a nurturing female rather than a dominant male, or a dominant.
That would make more sense. If you're going to go that route, that would make more sense.
Well, where do we all come from? We all came out of a woman. All of us.
I know.
The earth is arguably a woman.
Subject.
It gives birth. Life. All life. Comes out of other life. It's all.
Right.
This is all female stuff, and I think one of the great triumphs of organized religion over the last 3,000 years has been reinventing God as a man, because most Aboriginal and Indigenous religions view their female deities are very, very important. Paul, I'm out of time, but thank you for the call. Great talking with you. We'll continue the conversation and picking up your calls. And, I got a couple stories here for you, voter suppression and neoliberal bullies. But, the trial is I think it's on another pause. They keep going back and forth. But basically, they're just picking the jury, and that could last as much as a week or two.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. More updates on the Trump trial. The 5 key points that the prosecution is going to make basically are the Stormy Daniels allegation, the Karen McDougal allegation, number 2. Number 3, the doorman's claim. Now, this is a story that most people have not heard. A former doorman at the Trump Tower property who was, the doorman, right? Claimed that he knew that some year fathered a child out of wedlock, and he knew who the mother was. And he took this claim to David Pecker and said a story in the National Enquirer about it. David Pecker paid him $30,000 and killed the story. So this is the third catch and kill story. The number 4, the longtime agreement among Trump, Cohen, and Pecker to catch these stories that might be negative for Trump and bury them. And number 5, of course, the Access Hollywood tape. So we'll see. It could take a day. They've got 6,000 prospective jurors lined up. There are 500 of them right now in New York City, and they're bringing them before the court, and in batches. And the judge, he'll get a big batch of people, and he says, does anybody feel like, Donald Trump is the guy who's on trial here. Does anybody feel like they can't be impartial? And a number of people will raise their hands. I love him, I hate him, whatever. And they just get to leave. Their jury duty obligation is fulfilled. So we'll see how long it takes. I'm guessing it's not going to take the week or 2 weeks that everybody is thinking, but the fact of the matter is that each side has a certain number of jurors that they can basically strike for any reason. They may strike them for things like, race or what they think is political bias. They can't say that out loud, but that does happen a lot. So we'll see where that goes. Trump, the prosecutors this morning, I mentioned earlier that we have more detail on this now. I mentioned earlier that the prosecutors wanted Trump to be held in in contempt of court for going after Judge Merchan's daughter this last weekend on Truth Social. They are asking for him to be fined $3,000 for violating the gag order, and they're asking the judge to commit to putting Trump in jail the next time he violates the gag order. Now, this is calling Trump's bluff in a big, big way. The judge has not ruled on this yet, at least to the best of my knowledge. So, in fact, they're dealing with the jurors right now. And in that process, as they're dealing with the jurors, apparently Trump was up all night, rage tweeting on Truth Social. He's panicked. He's looking at each one of these charges has jail time associated with them, and he's got 34 charges. I mean, he could be looking at the rest of his life in prison. Now, the practical reality is that that's unlikely. The practical reality is that if he's convicted, in all probability, he would get, home confinement and a substantial fine, because we just tend not to send white billionaires to jail in America, sadly. But that's how it is. But anyhow, Trump was sitting in the courtroom as they were going through the kind of routine stuff of, bring in the jury pool and let me ask them questions and things like that. And he fell asleep just a few minutes ago. This was Eric Ulebacher reporting to, let's see if it says the network. Oh, this was on X, and courtroom reporter Stuart Bishop. He said, it very much looks like Trump is dozing off right now. And then that was Bishop. And then Ubelacker said, tough to see the screen in the overflow room, but I swear Trump is nodding off at the defense table. His chin just hit his chest, then his head shot back up. We've all been there. So, 34 crimes, or 34 counts, rather. And finally, just, what might be an interesting note, Clarence Thomas, the deciding vote in Shelby County, the deciding vote to gut the Civil Rights Act, the deciding vote in Bush v. Gore. He had been appointed by Bush's father. In 2000, he made George W. Bush president. The deciding vote in Citizens United, which fully legalized political bribery in the United States. Clarence Thomas did not show up today for the Supreme Court, and he did not notify them that he was not going to be showing up. Didn't say whether he was sick or whatever. A couple sessions ago, 2 years ago, he missed a couple of court sessions because he had an infection. But he's the oldest guy on the court. He's 75 years old. He joined the court in 1991. The neoliberal bullies have controlled the world long enough. This is a fascinating piece by George Monbiot, who I have great admiration for. George is just one of the great writers of our time. And, you know, his stuff shows up on The Guardian a lot. This is published over at Common Dreams. I suspect it was published elsewhere first. But he notes the researchers claim to be surprised by their findings, but is it really so remarkable? A large and impressive study of children's progress into adulthood found that those who display bullying and aggressive behavior at school are more likely to have better jobs and earn more as adults. Now, this does not mean that you want your child to be a school bully, or that good jobs are, you know, only go to people who are bullies. What you find is that bullying actually harms society. A win for bullies is a loss for everyone else in this kind of zero-sum game. And school bullies, as adults, are more likely to abuse alcohol, they're more likely to smoke cigarettes, they're more likely to break the law, and they're more likely to suffer mental health problems in later life. But the point is that 45 years of neoliberalism, ever since Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Donald Trump in the United States, introduced our countries and thus the world to neoliberalism, and now it has been adopted by most democracies around the world in greater or lesser measure. Neoliberalism generates inequality. Inequality creates bullying, and basically empowers these people. And with greater disparities in income and status, George Monbiot writes, stress rises, competition sharpens, and the urge to dominate intensifies. In other words, the pathology feeds on itself. And he argues we should try to build societies in which aggression and dominance are not rewarded. He said, but at every stage forced into these destructive competitions, not only are children pressed repeatedly into winnowing contests, but so are schools. And, as always, he says the competition is organized to enable the wealthy and powerful to win. They're the ones who can give their kids, after-school tutoring, for example, things like that. And he notes, overt bullying is now resurgent in politics around the world. Trump, Putin, Netanyahu, Orban, Milei, down in Argentina, and others, they don't do much to disguise their crude dominance behaviors. Trump stalking Hillary Clinton in the debate, remember, that was just, bullying, it was pure bullying. You could see the kind of child he was, right? He was the bully when he was sent off to prep school. And the same dynamics operate at the global level. And I would say that what we're looking at right now in Iran and Israel is two bullies, Netanyahu and the mullahs. And what's this leading us to? It's leading us to environmental and political collapse. And that is not a good thing. So I'm with George Monbiot. It's time to say no to bullying. So I also want to get into the voter suppression and whether it can hand the election, the 2024 election to Donald Trump. I'll share that with you on the other side of this break. We did talk about that at some length on Friday with Greg Palast, so I'll be fairly brief, and I'll be picking up your phone calls. So stay tuned. We'll be right back as the trial of the century rolls on in its very, very, very initial stages. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Speaking the truths the GOP would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Paul in Sparta, Wisconsin. Hey, Paul, what's up?
The other day you had Greg Palast on, and he was talking about how one person can challenge 50, 60,000 people to let them vote.
Yep, in Georgia.
Well,
and now in Texas.
Sunday, I heard on one of the other right-wing channels on TV that Donald Trump and the new Speaker of the House they want to pass a law that says you have to be a citizen to vote, which it already does say that.
Right, that's already the law.
But now they want you to prove that you are a citizen, that you either have a birth certificate or a passport.
Yeah, Georgia passed this law last year, and it just got approved by the courts last week. And what that means is that about a third of all married women will not be able to vote in Georgia. Now, this doesn't affect already registered voters in Georgia, but, you know, Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger are purging voters from the rolls like there's no tomorrow. So what do you call it? Re-sign up, you know, and for, you know, as voters, re-register. And now they've got to show their birth certificate and their driver's license, and in order to register to vote. And if the name on your birth certificate is your maiden name and the name on your driver's license is your married name, 90% of women take their husband's name when they marry, then you will not be allowed to vote. And only about an estimated third of women in Georgia actually went through a legal process to change their names. So there's going to be probably between a third and two-thirds of all married women in Georgia, or divorced women in Georgia for that matter, who are trying to register to vote will not be allowed to vote going forward. And you know, the reason Georgia's doing this is because they know that women are seriously pissed off about the abortion law.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, they said the other day that they're going to make this make it a national law.
Yep.
And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't have a birth certificate or a passport. I mean, I don't know where they're at.
Yeah.
Or anything.
Yeah, no, I went through this when I got my first passport back in the 70s, having to reach out to the hospital in Grand Rapids where I was born, because, you know, to get my birth certificate. And, you know, that hospital is has gone through a lot of changes, shall we say. It was quite an ordeal. I had to hire a guy in Grand Rapids to track it down. It cost me a couple $100 bucks, $1,000 in today's dollars.
These Republicans have nothing they're running on, so, you know, the only thing they can do is cheat.
That's exactly right. I mean, most Americans are not, you know, they're not big fans of abortion bans. They're not big fans of billionaire tax cuts. They're not big fans of more pollution from the oil and chemical industries. They're not big fans of busting unions. They're not big fans of privatizing Medicare and eliminating Social Security. Most Americans like the stuff the Democrats are offering. And so if Republicans are going to win elections, they really only have two choices. Number one, fight the culture wars, make it all about guns or gays or God. And number two, make it so that people who are likely to vote as Democrats, and the easiest demographic in that group are black people, can't vote.
Right.
And, you know, that's, as you point out, Paul, that's exactly what they're doing. Paul, thanks for the call.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Good talking to you. It's 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, you know, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com.
I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "Can Voter Suppression Hand the 2024 Election to Donald Trump?" And it's largely based on the information that Greg Palast presented on this program on Friday. So I won't belabor it. I just want to point out in some detail that down in Georgia, Georgia was the first state to allow this. It was SB 202. It allowed mass voter challenges. And so you got, these people like Pam Reardon and Alton Sterling, these Republican operatives. Pam Reardon challenged 32,000 votes. Alton Sterling challenged over 4,000 votes. They're getting the list from this group called True the Vote out of Texas, and in most cases. And, fortunately, Pam Reardon's list was blocked, but Alton Sterling's, his 4,000 mostly black people got thrown off the rolls. In fact, one of them was a major general, Jamal Turner, who had been assigned to an Air Force base in California, or a military base, I think it was a naval base actually in California, and he was still, his legal residence was still in Georgia. He was getting his mail in California, but, he lived in Georgia. And so he was going to absentee vote, and they threw him off the voting rolls. And so Greg invited Alton Sterling, the guy who submitted General Turner's name to be purged and successfully purged him off the voting rolls. He invited Alton Sterling over to Turner's home without telling him that it was the home of Jamal Turner, this major general in the military. You wanted him purged because he moved out of state. And Alton Sterling is like, yeah, he moved. And Greg said, well, let me introduce you to General Turner. And General Turner walks out of the bedroom and introduces himself and, blows Mr. Sterling's mind. But this is what's going on. And now we've got five other states, that have adopted this same thing, including Arizona and Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Texas. And I realize Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin now have Democratic governors, and so it's going to be a little harder. But in Texas, they're going to go full tilt boogie on this thing. Now, we do have a law that says that we have a right to vote. The National Voting Registration Act says, this is from the preamble, it says, Congress finds that the right of citizens of the United States to vote is a fundamental right. I mean, it's right there. Now, if you have a right, government can't take that right away from you without due process. For example, if you own a gun and the government wants to take that gun away from you, the government of the state of Georgia, for example, wants to take your gun away, they have to go to court. They have to get a judge to sign off on it. But if they want to take your vote away, they don't have to do squat. They don't even have to tell you that they took your vote away. So, what I'm calling for here, and I think it's a pretty important call, is for Congress, once the Democrats have Congress back, once they take back the House of Representatives, and that may happen in the next few months, God only knows, but certainly next year, if we can prevail in this election, when Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the White House, the first order of business has to be passing legislation, that absolutely unambiguously, and I would say the NVRA already does this, but the Supreme Court ignored it. In the 2018 case where John Husted, the Ohio Secretary of State, was sued for purging hundreds of thousands of black voters in Cincinnati and Cleveland off the Ohio voting rolls. In that case, the Sam Alito, who wrote the decision, said, he identified the National Voting Rights Act and said, or Voting Registration Act, and said that this doesn't apply. Now, that's, the opinion of the majority of the Supreme Court, and it was a pure Republican majority. There wasn't a single Democrat on the court who went along with that. It was a 5-4 decision. But that, and similarly in the Shelby County case, the 5 Republicans who were then on the court said, there's no racism anymore. Look, we got a black president here. So therefore, the race problem is solved, and we can let these states that used to be required to have pre-clearance before they purged black people from the voting rolls to just go ahead and purge all the black people they want. And they're doing it. They're absolutely doing it. Joe Biden won Wisconsin by what? 11, 20, between 10 and 20,000 votes. He won Georgia by 11,800 votes, I think it was, or whatever Donald Trump was begging for. He won Michigan by a relatively slim majority. Actually, the majority by which he won in the 3 primary swing states that did determine the election was 44,000 votes. And Republicans so far in those states have purged several 100,000 black voters off the voting rolls in anticipation of the 2024 election. So this election is going to be hard fought, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be tighter than we ever imagined. The deciding factor could be women, but again, because Georgia just passed a law that you can't register to vote unless the name on your birth certificate is the same as your driver's license, married women are in big trouble.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Because, most married women have a birth certificate that has a different name on 90% of married women took their husband's name at marriage.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by New York Times bestselling author Dan Jones. This is from Chapter 1. It begins the book, The Count and the Imam. Count Roger of Sicily lifted his leg and farted. "By the truth of my religion," he exclaimed, "there is more use in that than in what you are here to say." His advisors stood chastened and a little perplexed. The Count before them was in his late 40s and salted to his bones with the experience of military campaigning in southern Italy and the islands of the central Mediterranean. As a young warrior, he had been described by one flatterer as tall and well-made, a most fluent speaker, shrewd in counsel, far-sighted in the planning of things to be done, cheerful and pleasant to everyone. In middle age, he had hardened somewhat and was not one to waste his words on fools. The plan the advisors had recommended had seemed like a good one, as courtiers' plans very often do, before they are shredded by the critiques of short-tempered potentates. Not far across the sea from Sicily, roughly 75 miles at the closest point, lay the remains of what had in ancient times been called Carthage, afterward the Roman province of Africa, and now in the 11th century, Ifriqiya. Its cities, including the capital Mahdia, and on the coast, and Kairoun Island, where a vast mosque and school had for many generations been frequented by the greatest philosophers and natural scientists in North Africa, were under the shaky command of a crumbling dynasty of Berber Muslims known as the Zirids. The countryside was controlled by various Arab Bedouin tribes sent from Egypt to drive the Zirids out. Political stability was collapsing. Here lay warm and fertile farmlands. There sat prosperous port towns, all ripe for the taking. Roger's counselors thought so, and they had therefore recommended to their testy overlord the proposal of a cousin whom one source names only as Baldwin. This Baldwin had come into possession of a great army of Christian soldiers and was casting around for somewhere godless to conquer. He had asked Roger's blessing to come to Sicily and use it as a launch pad for an invasion of Irafika. "I shall be a neighbor of yours," he had explained, as though this were good news. But Roger of Sicily was not feeling neighborly. Irafika was undoubtedly ruled by various followers of Islam, he said, but those infidels happened to be sworn partners of the Sicilians in agreements that kept the peace and allowed for a rich exchange of goods in the island's markets and ports. The last thing he wanted, he ranted to his gathered minions, was a cousin imposing on his hospitality, waging a reckless war that would disrupt Sicilian trade if it was successful, and cost him a lot of money in military support if it failed. Irafia may indeed have been vulnerable, but if anyone was going to exploit that, it was going to be Roger himself. He had spent the last 2.5 decades, almost his entire adult life, carving out his rule in the region, and it would have been a limp end indeed if he were now to put it at risk, that pursuit of, to put it at risk in pursuit of some harebrained scheme cooked up by a kinsman who had never troubled the soil of the island with his sweat. If this Baldwin wanted to fight Muslims, said Roger, he would have to find a different part of the Mediterranean in which to go about his business. There were plenty of places he could name that would be preferable to Sicily's backyard. He summoned Baldwin's personal envoy to his presence and informed him of his decisions. If his master was really serious, he said, then the best way to proceed is to conquer Jerusalem. That is how it all began. Roger, Count of Sicily, was 11th century Europe's ultimate self-made man. He was born around the year 1040 as the youngest of 12 sons sired by a minor nobleman from Normandy called Tancred of Hauteville. Given the protocols of inheritance, being born even as a second son implied a lifelong burden of fortune hunting rather than easy inheritance. To have 11 brothers ahead of you was a disaster. But by the end of the century, the Normans had begun to conquer their way around Western Europe. They took command of Saxon England in 1066. At the same time, southern Italy fell under their gaze, and opportunities that may have seemed limited for younger sons within Normandy itself, but for anyone prepared to travel, opportunity abounded. As a young man, therefore, Roger had left his homeland in what is now northwest France and set out for territory that already called many of his kinsmen and countrymen, the rich but unstable southern Italian regions of Calabria and Apulia. Toe and heel of the Italian boot, Calabria and Apulia were lands where resources were plentiful, authority was contested, and an ambitious young man with a yen for politics and warfare might make his name. Other Normans of the Hauteville clan had already found success here, fighting against the rival superpowers in the region, principally the Byzantine Greeks and Roman popes, both of whom regarded the Normans with suspicion bordering on alarm. The book Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by Dan Jones.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%. And how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at hartmannreport.com. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Can voter suppression hand the 2024 election to Trump? I posted this over at Daily Kos this morning, too, although you may have to scroll down the page of ways to find it. So what's on your mind today? Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's up?
Well, with the trial going on, my first concern is that he'll just tell his little minions, once the jury gets picked, go out and just let them know, something can happen if you don't vote the right way. or you might not get that bribe that you want.
Yeah, the biggest fear is that you know, among the jurors there are Trump supporters who will lie to get on the jury to hang this thing up, because in a criminal case, one single juror can hang the whole thing, and and then there's basically no penalty for that. You know, afterward they could you know, confess to it and write a book and make a fortune and you know, be the favorite guest at the White House if Trump becomes president. You know, it's...
So a jury trial doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, well, it does mean something, but there is this risk. There is a very real risk.
Yeah. Well, on December 7th, 1941, I would say 99.9% of this country was anti-fascist.
Right.
And their descendants, like me, are still anti-fascist. And he's the biggest fascist I've ever seen.
Yeah. And now it's only about 2/3 of us who are anti-fascist, which is shocking, Sandra.
Yeah.
You know, my father, were he still alive, would be astonished. Sandra, thank you so much for the call. Spot on. Amen. Thank you. Tony in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Tony. Thanks for listening to KNKS. What's up?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for taking my call. Okay, I just wanted to tell you what I'm going to be doing here after the election thing gets full force after the Labor Day or Memorial Day, whatever it is. I'm going to volunteer to sit with the table and sign people up to vote. And what I've done is, I think about a year after Biden was in office, it was about a year, I went to the library and I said, can you please print out everything that President Biden has done? And they printed it out for me, and it was like 7.5 pages long. Wow. And there were 33 items on every single page.
Wow.
And it was filled with things like eliminated all Medicaid work requirements, eliminated regulation that allows states to privatize their exchanges, you know, $10 billion for homeowner relief, 1 year child independent care credit, and it goes on and on. It just goes on and on and on. So before I do this with the table for voter registration, I'm going to go to the library and get everything that Biden has done for the rest of, because this is only the first year and we're 7.5 pages long. I'm going to get the rest of them and also print out what Trump did and have them there, maybe 2 or 3 sets of pamphlets for people to look at. I'm not thinking I will convince any Trump supporters. Sadly, my own daughter is one, and I've not been able to convince her. But maybe people that are not sure would look at this and say, oh, my God, you know, what a difference. You can look at it right there in black and white, and you can get it printed up. Either if you have a home printer at home, you can do it with your own computer and your printer, or if you don't have a printer, or even if you don't have a computer, you can go to the library and get it done.
What's the website where you found this?
I don't know. It's just year one, what Biden has done, mega thread, what Biden
How do you spell
has
it?
done. Mega thread, MEGA, and then thread, THREAD. Year one, what Biden has done, mega thread.
Okay. All right. Something to plug into a search engine. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
Good luck.
You're welcome.
Good luck, and good on you for registering people to vote. There's no more important work right now. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Brandon in San Jose. Hey, Brandon, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Cool. So I just have this, I mean, at the risk of sounding ignorant, of course, I'm curious as to what does Putin want in terms of why is he doing this with Ukraine?
Oh, he's said that. He gave a 2-hour speech about 5 months ago in which he said that, you know, Greater Russia started in Kyiv 700 years ago or 900 years ago. I forget which. I think it was 940 years ago, in fact. And by the way, it was started by Scandinavians, by Swedes and Norwegians, but the Vikings. But you know, his argument is that Ukraine has no claim to be an independent nation. That Ukraine is part of Greater Russia. Now, at that time, that Kyiv was being, you know, Kyiv goes back to about 1600 years ago, but it became a major, you know, the major hub of the Russian Empire 940 years ago. And at that time, Moscow was just a little farming village. And so, it's, his argument is that Ukraine isn't actually an independent country. I mean, if you want to make that argument, fine. I mean, you could argue that, America or Central America is part of the Aztec Empire or something.
Right. We should go back to expanding and invading Mexico, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. Or Mexico could claim, Texas and California used to be part of Mexico, and they did.
Right. That's
Arizona,
ridiculous.
New Mexico. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
But that's his argument. That's his argument.
It's sheer expansionist ideology.
Yeah. And he's trying to put the band back together. He's trying to recreate the greater Soviet Union, and he doesn't just want Ukraine.
Right,
and he's made this clear.
Right.
He wants Moldova.
Right, I've heard that argument.
He wants Poland. He wants Czechoslovakia back. He wants Hungary back. He's already mostly got Hungary back, although the Hungarians are starting to revolt. He wants Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. He wants all those countries that are on his eastern border or contiguous with countries on his eastern border, contiguous with Ukraine. He wants them all back. And, he's willing to kill. I mean, he's killed hundreds of thousands of people just to get what he's gotten in Ukraine so far. And he's abducted over 100,000 Ukrainian children and trafficked them into Russia, which is the world's second largest producer of child pornography. It's not even illegal in Russia to possess child pornography. And he's kidnapped over 100,000 Ukrainian children and sold them in Russia. I mean, this is just evil on a scale that is difficult to imagine. Brandon, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. You're good question. Thank you. Noah in Muncie, Indiana. Hey, Noah, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just fine.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for taking my call. I'm darkly yours, as always. I would love to comment on the court proceedings, but I don't want to be droll. It's just going to follow procedure and a lot of legalities. And
it's going to be an interesting trial, but I think the blow-by-blow is going to be largely boring. We'll see.
My comment for today was, it's more about the election. What do a traditionalist conservative, a trans influencer, and a Satanist anarchist have in common? And all of them have the answer to that, I will say, is that they're all influential people that I know personally and I'm quite good friends with, and they've all said they're voting for RFK.
Yikes.
Which to me is just short script for really another freaking Kennedy right now.
Yeah, well, not just that. It's a vote for Donald Trump. And RFK, one of the leaders of his campaign came out and said it just 2 weeks ago. She's been fired now, but she was unambiguous. A vote for Bobby Kennedy is a vote for Donald Trump.
And I just cannot get that message across. And I'm speaking from a millennial perspective. I know a lot of the audience here are my elders that I respect and I enjoy learning from. But that's just kind of where I'm at right now politically. Is I don't see the argument for RFK and this hatred of Democrats that supersedes the real and present threat of the MAGA movement.
Well, the Russian trolls are pushing RFK right now really hard on social media. So, that may have something to do with it. They, in the 2016 and 2020 elections, the Russian trolls mostly targeted black people. That was more than 80% of their efforts. Now they're targeting the alternative health movement, the kind of New Age health movement, and the vegetarians. They're coming after those folks, the Russian trolls. And I've heard that they're trying to influence the gay movement, but I'm skeptical that they'll have much impact there. But you said, a trans influencer, that's pretty bad. No, I got to run, but thank you for the call. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with you, picking up your calls. And welcome back, Ron in Daytona Beach, Florida. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. And you got the best program on YouTube.
Well, thank you.
What I'm going to say might offend some people, but that's okay. How many courses in biochemistry or genetics do you think our state legislatures have taken?
I'd say probably on average 0.
That's what I would say.
0.1.
Well, you know, they don't they don't even talk about intersex. There's intersex people. They never bring that up.
Yeah.
And did you know that there's some studies, one down in University of Georgia at Augusta, that said there are 21 gene variants that are linking gender dysphoria. Can you imagine that? What happens if we find out it's genetic?
Yeah, I mean, this is true across species. When Louise and I lived on a floating home in the Willamette River back a decade ago, for 3 years in a row, we had a pair of male ducks. We called them Adam and Steve, who, they tried mating and they hung out together and they defended each other from, other males that came around, and we fed them. They mostly hung around our houseboat. But you see homosexuality and variations in sexuality in all species. This is nature.
Yeah, and X, Y, Y, X, X, Y. There's all kinds of genetic anomalies in biology, and like you said, well. And one of the things that hit me in the face when we were doing investigations of child abuse was...
Investigations of what, Ron? Your phone is fading in and out here.
Child abuse.
Okay.
Was unwanted children. In science, Newton's third law of motion, any action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, let me tell you, if we let people have children that they don't want, we're in for hell. You're talking about the prisons growing up. You're talking about abused kids. You don't know what we're in for.
Back in the 90s, these two economists published this book called Freakonomics. Remember that? And they did a deep dive into this stuff, and there was a marked collapse in the crime rate in the mid to late 90s, and that was just about the time that the last of the forced birth babies were turning adults. The pre-1972, pre-Roe v. Wade, and really abortion didn't become widespreadly available until 74, 75, 76. It took a couple of years for, abortion networks to build up around the country. And, their conclusion was that unwanted children had been driving the crime rates prior to the late 90s, and that as those unwanted children, as there were fewer unwanted children coming up, you would see crime going down. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And you're right, Ron. I think that we're going to see an explosion in crime 20 years down the road, 15 to 25 years down the road from right now as a result of this Dobbs decision. Ron, I got to run, but thank you. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So right-wing billionaires are major funders of the GOP, and the GOP has been promoting basically a death cult. You've got Ron DeSantis most recently signing a law that eliminates legal liability for medical professionals who refuse to provide services to people in crisis if it violates their moral, ethical, or religious convictions. The Republican Party has picked up from the Democrats, actually, ironically, weirdly. You know, the old Dixiecrats, the old Southern racists, they used to be Democrats prior to 1964, but then, you know, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all that, you know, and Nixon came in along in '68 with the Southern strategy, and now they're all Republicans. So why are these right-wing billionaires willing to support this death cult? Is it really just about taxes and deregulation? There's a piece about it at thehartmannreport.com. Check it out. 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. Marie in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Marie, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I actually called about the jury selection process because, as I've mentioned before, I'm an attorney. But if you don't mind, I would like to diverge just quickly regarding the election, the voter suppression.
Sure.
Because I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I've been calling into your show just about every month to sound the alarm about this very same thing. And I was so glad that you had, Greg
Palast.
last weekend.
Yeah,
Greg Palast, thank you. Just a reminder, if you've got to prove, especially for women, if you've got to prove your nationality and with a birth certificate, and you need proof of the name difference, that's going to generally involve your marriage certificate, because it will usually have a space on it that says bride's name after marriage. Mm-hmm. Be aware that there are some states, such as South Carolina, that does not change your name as part of the marriage process.
Wow.
And so your marriage license will not have that change. And women who were married in South Carolina, but who were nonetheless residents of Georgia, or of another state that is checking, doing these name checks as a part of voting, they will need to either get remarried in the state that does change your name, or they'll have to go to court to file a petition for a name change.
And this all assumes that you can even find your marriage certificate.
Exactly. So I'm going to sound the alarm yet again, like I do once a month. Make sure you have your birth certificate, passport, marriage certificate, or divorce decree if your name changes, part of that, because those are going to be part of verifying who you are if you get challenged by one of these nut jobs.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Regarding the jury selections, in most states, there are what's called peremptory strikes. Peremptory strikes are, I just don't get a good feeling about this person. And there's a limit to the number of those.
Right.
If there is a reason for cause to reject a juror, they say something like, I don't believe he's guilty, I believe this is just a show trial, or they say something that clearly indicates that they are unlikely to be able to regard just the evidence presented and make a determination based on the jury instructions that the judge delivers, then that would be a strike for cause. The other thing, and strikes for cause, they don't have a limit, because essentially there is a reason not to put this person on the jury that's not just, I don't get a good feeling about them. And then there's something called a Batson challenge. And a Batson challenge, either side can make a Batson motion to the court to say, I believe that the other side is making their jury selections on the basis of an improper purpose. I believe that they're striking all black people. I believe that they're striking predominantly women. And so based on a Batson challenge, the other side will have to present to the judge the reasons why they chose the jurors to strike that they chose.
Is that spelled B-A-T-S-O-N? Is it named after somebody?
That is correct. Yes, it is. It's a court case. Yeah, okay. It's based on a court case. Mm-hmm. And then on the basis of a Batson challenge, because I've had this happen to me, if there was a successful Batson challenge, the whole jury pool gets put back and you start over again. Really? Batson challenges, if you lose them, they do nothing but hack off the jury, because they've been sitting there for hours waiting to determine whether or not they're being selected or being let go so they can go about their life.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it works. There's an art to jury selection, because what they're looking at, what you've got to kind of game out, and I'm sorry to use the word game, but what you've got to game out is it worth striking juror, let's say number 5, as a peremptory, right? Just because you don't get a good feeling about them, when the juror that you really need to strike is number 25, because you know that person, you don't get a good feeling about them. They haven't said anything to be stricken for cause, but you know that the other side is going to want that person. So you have to game out, who are they likely to strike, and who is it worth me holding off on my peremptory strikes to get rid of?
Right. So how do you...
So that's why there are jury consultants.
You know, as somebody who has done this and an attorney down there in Atlanta, and I realize you may or may not be familiar with New York law, but how do you expect this jury selection to go in New York, and how long do you expect it to take?
I would be surprised if jury selection is completed this week. Really? I wouldn't be... to me, I'm looking... I would hazard like 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
Because they're going to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
They're going to ask a lot of follow-up questions. And let me say this. When you have a juror who says something that is close to being worth striking for cause, you'll have the other side come back and try to rehabilitate them with follow-up questions. So those follow-up questions may be, I heard you say that you believe that this defendant is guilty. Are you saying that you can't follow the law when the judge tells you to? Are you saying you wouldn't follow the law? And that's how you try to rehabilitate them. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't.
Fascinating. So we may be in for several kind of boring weeks, essentially, as the jury selection process goes on before we hear from Stormy Daniels, which is when it's going to get exciting. Marie, thank you so much for the information. I always value your calls. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory by Andrew Bacevich. This is from the introduction. Without the Cold War, what's the point of being an American? Henry Rabbit Angstrom, novelist John Updike's late 20th century everyman, posed that question just as the long twilight struggle was winding down. More than a quarter of a century later, Rabbit's plaintive query still awaits a definitive answer. Indeed, the passage of time has only sown confusion about whether there is a point to being an American. Even as the Cold War was ending, Updike's surrogate was not alone in feeling at a loss. By the 1980s, the Cold War had become more than a mere situation or circumstance. It was a state of mind. As had Rabbit, most Americans had come to take its existence for granted. Like the polar ice cap or baseball's status as the national pastime, it had acquired an appearance of permanence. So its passing caught Rabbit's fellow citizens unawares. Those charged with managing the Cold War were, if anything, even more surprised. The enterprise to which they had devoted their professional lives had suddenly vanished. Here was a contingency that the sprawling U.S. national security apparatus, itself a product of the anti-communist crusade, had failed to anticipate. At one level, of course, the surprise could not have been more gratifying. In the epic competition against pitting West against East, the God-fearing against the godless, and democracy against totalitarianism, our side had won. All-out nuclear war had been averted. The cause of freedom, which Americans felt certain they themselves embodied, had prevailed. Victory was decisive, sweeping, and unequivocal. In another sense, however, the passing of the Cold War could not have been more disorienting. In 1987, a senior advisor to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev had warned, "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." As the Soviet Union passed out of existence, Americans were left not just without that enemy, but without even a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. However imperfectly, the Cold War had, for several decades, offered a semblance of order and coherence. The collapse of communism shattered that framework. Where there had been purposefulness and predictability, now there was neither. Winning the Cold War brought Americans face to face with a predicament comparable to that confronting the lucky fellow who wins the Mega Millions lottery. Hidden within an apparent windfall is the potential for monumental disaster. Putting that windfall to good use while avoiding the pitfalls inherent in suddenly acquiring riches calls for prudence and self-awareness. Not easily demonstrated when the big house, luxury car, and vacation condo you've always wanted are yours for the asking. Similarly, the end of the Cold War might have given Americans pause, especially since the issues at hand were of considerably greater significance than homes, cars, and condos. At least in theory, the moment might have invited reflection on some first-order questions. What is the meaning of freedom? What does freedom allow? What obligations does it impose? Whom or what does it exclude? Of course, Americans had been wrestling with such questions since well before 1776, their answers evolving over time. During the several decades of the Cold War, however, the exigencies of the East-West rivalry had offered a reason to throttle down impulses to explore America's furthermost boundaries, or freedom's furthermost boundaries. Except on the fringes of American politics, most citizens accepted the word from Washington that their way of life was under grave threat. In the pecking order of national priorities, addressing that threat, defending freedom rather than enlarging it, tended to take precedence over other considerations. This is not to suggest that Cold War Americans were a complicated lot. They were not. From the 1950s, misleadingly enshrined as a decade of conformity, through the Reagan-dominated 1980s, domestic crises and controversies were constants. Among the rising or raging Americans were civil liberties, the nuclear arms race, mismanaged wars of dubious provenance, challenges to artistic tradition, left-wing and right-wing radicalism, crass materialism that coexisted with widespread poverty, and a host of simmering issues connected to race, sex, and gender. Yet through it all, an uncommon outlook centered on resistance to the red threat endured. For most citizens, most of the time, the Cold War itself was sufficient to explain the point of being an American. The collapse of the Soviet Empire between 1989 and 1991 robbed that outlook of its last vestiges of authority. Rarely, if ever, had the transition from one historical period to another occurred quite so abruptly, with such a precise set of demarcations, and with such profound implications. As if in an instant, the discipline that the Cold War had imposed vanished. The absurdity of defining reality as an either-or choice, red or dead, slave or free, good versus evil, now became blazingly apparent. The impact on American ambitions and expectations was akin to removing the governor from an internal combustion engine. Suddenly, the throttle opened up. The future appeared equally promising, offering Americans a seemingly endless array of choices, while confronting them with few evident constraints. Everything seemed possible. Confident that an era of unprecedented U.S. economic, military, and cultural ascendancy now beckoned, members of an intoxicated elite threw caution to the winds. The book, The Age of Illusion, by Andrew Bacevich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. The latest updates. I will be keeping you up to date every day of the Donald Trump trial, no matter how long it lasts, on a regular basis. So you need go nowhere else for your Donald Trump juicy tidbits. Just a few minutes ago, Judge Juan Marchand told Donald Trump that he must attend every day of the trial or face arrest. He said, if you do not show up, there will be an arrest. If you deliberately fail to appear in court when required, then any proceeding in your case, including hearing, trial, and if you are convicted, sentence, can and will continue in your absence. A warrant for your arrest will be issued, and you will be subject to separate prosecution and separate punishment for bail jumping, no matter what happens in this case. If you deliberately refuse to come to court when required or in any way deliberately obstruct or interfere with the effort to bring you to court, then in any proceeding in the case, in your case, including hearing, trial, and if you are convicted, sentence, can and will continue in your absence. So the judge is basically putting Trump on notice that there's nothing he can do. You'll recall I mentioned in the first hour of the program that the big fear everybody has is that a Trump humper will make his way onto the jury pool, will lie, much like Donald Trump does. I mean, the noble lie, right? The lie told to produce a good outcome, even though it's a lie, will lie in ways that would cause them to think that he could be impartial or she could be impartial. Well, it got a little weirder today. Clay Travis is an attorney, and he's got this right-wing sports and American culture show on Fox. And just a few hours ago, or just an hour or so ago, his X account, his Twitter account, displayed a post that reads, quote, if you're a Trump supporter in New York City who is a part of the jury pool, do everything you can to get seated on the jury and then refuse to convict as a matter of principle, dooming the case via a hung jury. It's the most patriotic thing you can possibly do. Eric Swalwell, the congressman from California, retweeted that with the note that the jury tampering, it's what they do, it's a felony. Will Clay Travis be arrested for attempted jury tampering? I kind of doubt it. My colleague Dean Obeidallah, who's also an attorney here on Sirius XM, he said, hoping the Manhattan DA is aware of this attempted jury tampering by Fox News regular Clay Travis. He also wrote, this is the exact type of juror tampering I knew Trumpers would engage in. Next, Clay will tell Trumpers to bribe jurors or witnesses. MAGA is a cancer. And Travis responded to Eric Swalwell, who accused him of jury tampering. He said, this isn't jury tampering, you imbecile. I would nullify if I were seated on the jury as a matter of principle. I think all Americans with a comprehension of basic justice should do the same. Very strange. Very strange. Also, Greg Palast, was, in fact, was at our house over the weekend. And so Louise and I and Greg and our oldest daughter went to watch Civil War, this new movie by Kirsten Dunst and Alex Garland, or featuring them, starring them. And I thought it was interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It didn't have a lot of depth in one respect. I mean, you had no idea. You got the Western Alliance of Texas and California who have with help from Florida, who have risen up against America, and well, I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but and then you've got, of course, the United States government. So it seems like, it's like right-wingers rising up, except that the president has given himself a third term in violation of the Constitution, and that was one of the things that kind of set them off. And so was this the rebellion against Trump, or was this the rebellion against, it's really hard to put it in this context. But it does, there's one line in the movie that I thought was particularly important. This is Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee Miller, I forget her last name. Her namesake was Lee Miller, who was the famous photographer who captured the film, on film, the Battle of Alsace and the liberation of Buchenwald and Dachau. Lee Smith is her name. She says this, she makes this comment, and I thought it was kind of the essence of the movie. She said, every time I survived a war zone, I thought I was sending a warning home. Don't do this. But here we are. And, you know, what was meaningful to me about the movie is that it was a great war as hell movie. It shows the horror of civil war, you know, of citizens killing other citizens. In some cases, just quite gratuitously, and how it spirals out of control and how it gets weird. And it does a very good job of characterizing that. The story is told through the eyes of a handful of photojournalists who are eagerly on their way from wherever they are, I forget now, to Washington, D.C. to try to interview the president before he either wins or loses the war. And yeah, I was entertained. I thought it was, you know, it was 2 hours that was well spent. It's an hour and 49 minutes, the movie. It was 2 hours that was well spent. And I'm glad I went to see it. But it's not the kind of profound film that I was thinking it might be. But, you know, good dumb fun, or you know, good thoughtful fun. Meanwhile, Matt Ford is writing over at the New Republic, newrepublic.com, which, by the way, is, I understand, is, sometime this week and next, is probably going to start publishing some of my stuff, which is, you know, a great honor. So if you haven't subscribed to the New Republic, you might want to. And get on the mailing list, if nothing else. They've got a great daily newsletter. Anyhow, he's writing, Matt Ford is writing, at least 2 states with Republican leaders, Alabama and Ohio, are now threatening to remove President Joe Biden from the November ballot. This is wacky. Now, this is not something that this is not the consequence of something that just recently happened. And I'll fill you in on this. Here's the problem. The Democratic National Convention is August 19th. It starts August 19th. It runs through the 22nd. But Ohio requires both political parties, and the Republican Party, you know, is going to be in July. Ohio requires both parties to submit their certified candidate by August 7th. And Joe Biden will not be legally that certified candidate until August 7th. That's Ohio. The same thing is happening in Alabama. Alabama Secretary of State Wes Moore sent a letter to Democrats warning that Biden could be ineligible for that state's ballot based on a similar deadline. He writes, if this office has not received a valid certificate of nomination from the Democratic Party following its convention by the statutory deadline, I will be unable to certify the names of the Democratic Party candidates for president and vice president for ballot preparation for the 2024 general election. That's pretty wild. Now, in Alabama, it kind of doesn't matter, except that, you know, it just adds to the vote total. In Ohio could easily be a swing state this year. I mean, look at all the people who just showed up to legalize abortion in Ohio. That's a bad sign for the Ohio Republicans. Now, these dates have been around for a while, and the Democratic and Republican parties having their conventions after these dates have happened before. In 2012, for example, Ohio was supposed to certify the presidential candidates by August 8th, but the Republican Party didn't have their convention until August 27th. And the Democrats, the Democratic Party, the DNC, was September 4th. But both Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, even though both of them missed that deadline, were on the Ohio ballot. Why? Because both parties submitted a letter that said, we expect these people to be our candidates. And Ohio said, okay, cool, we'll put you on the ballot. Same thing with Alabama. In the 2020 election cycle, the 2 major parties were required to certify their presidential candidates by August 20th of 2020. And Democrats certified the Biden-Harris ticket on the day of the deadline, which was also the last day of the Democratic Party. But Republicans, their convention didn't even start until August 24th. Keep in mind, in Alabama, August 20th was the deadline in 2020. But hey, they simply notified the state in advance that you know, Trump was going to be the probable nominee, and they put him on the ballot. So, in fact, state records show that the Alabama Republican Party didn't formally certify the Trump-Pence ticket until August 27th, which was a full, you know, and the RNC itself did not certify that Trump and Pence were the party's nominees until August 30th, a full 10 days after the Alabama deadline. So, you know, bottom line, these two states, Ohio and Alabama, are doing this essentially out of spite. You know, they're doing this to mess with the election. And rescheduling the Democratic Convention would be no easy feat, Matt Ford notes. The major networks, he writes, traditionally reserve some airtime for each party each night. That's all planned out in advance. If the Democrats move the convention earlier in the month to meet Alabama's August 15 deadline, they'd have to compete with the Summer Olympics, which take place between July 28th and August 11th. And the Republican convention is already scheduled for a week before that. The Republicans, you know, they're early enough. It's almost like the Republicans were planning this. Like Ohio and Alabama got together with the RNC and said, hey, RNC, have your nominating convention before August, you know, 7th. And they're doing that. They're doing it in July. Because the Democrats are going to have it after August 7th, and then we can keep Joe Biden off the ticket in Ohio and Alabama. How is this going to get resolved? I don't know. I mean, this is bizarre stuff. But it looks like, I mean, both states now, the Secretaries of State of both Ohio and Alabama have said that Biden will not be on the ticket unless the Democratic Party reschedules their convention. And the Democrats have, you know, not shown any indication that they plan to, or that they even can reschedule their convention. I mean, you know, conventions are planned years in advance. This takes a lot of time. So how's this going to play out? I don't know. But I would keep an eye on it. All righty. What's on your mind? It's 18 minutes past the hour. Again, I'll be keeping you up to date on anything that happens in the Trump trial, blow by blow, within minutes. Give us a call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls right after this. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Doris in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Doris, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for taking the call.
My pleasure.
In honor of Tax Day, I have a question. And I'd like to know, is it a crime for a person to tell other people that they do not, it is not legal for them to file federal tax returns or pay federal taxes? Is that actually a crime?
I doubt it. The First Amendment is quite clear that lying is not a crime unless you're doing it to a, you know, under oath or to a federal police, to the FBI, basically, a federal police officer. You know, now it's possible though that if somebody acted on it, that, you know, you might be charged with conspiracy to commit a crime. I frankly don't know, Doris. Why? What provokes this question?
Oh, I see someone posting on social media.
Mm-hmm. That
all the time.
That
all the time.
People shouldn't have to pay taxes or don't have to pay taxes.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's a question. Yeah. It would be probably a federal law question, although there may be state laws about this. I'm sorry, I just don't know. But you might want to you might want to respond to that person and let them know that if other people, you know, as a public service, not to talk to them, but to get it on the chain, you know, on the thread, that if other people follow this person's advice, they may well end up in jail.
I have.
Yeah.
And I reported it, you know, and nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
He just continues to to post?
Well, there's a substantial number of people, you know, a few thousand anyway, or maybe a few tens of thousands, maybe even a few hundreds of thousands, who call themselves sovereign citizens. This is a big part of the QAnon movement now, actually. And, you know, they believe that the United States is a corporation, not a government, and that we are all property of that corporation, and that the way you can free yourself from being property is to have your name in all caps or upper and lowercase, I forget which, on your, you know, reissue your birth certificate or something. And I mean, they've just got these weird notions, and one of them, of course, is that, you know, because the government is illegitimate, it cannot enforce its requirement to pay taxes. So, and then you've got, you know, some religious fanatics. I mean, the Watchtower people, what group is that? It's not the Seventh-day Adventists. It's not the Mormons. It's the Jehovah's Witnesses. That's right, the Jehovah's Witnesses. I believe that they have a, I mean, they don't vote because they believe that, you know, Jesus said separate church and state, essentially. I'm pretty sure, though, that they pay their taxes. I don't know for sure, but I would be surprised if they didn't pay their taxes. So, you know.
I also see postings on social media of people claiming that we are not the United States. We are 15 nations who have treaties.
Right, another part of the QAnon conspiracy theory.
Right, and that so we're all individual nations.
Yeah, you just got real muffled, Doris. I can't hear you. I can't understand you. I still can't. It sounds like you've got your thumb over the microphone. But Doris, I'm out of time anyway. I'm sorry. I've got to go. Thank you for the call. Fascinating. Fascinating. I don't know. You just warn people. We'll be right back. Talk media for the sane among us. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour. Voters want tax day to look different for billionaires. This over at Common Dreams, Amy Matsui. Women and families shouldn't have to struggle to meet caregivers' needs, she writes, while billionaires buy their third yacht and mega corporations see record profits. This tax day, while most of us are stressing about filing our tax returns correctly, many billionaires will laugh all the way to the bank as they pay a lower tax rate than their secretaries." And then she cites new polling. This is out of the National Women's Law Center and the group Moms Rising, that shows that mothers across the nation, women across the nation, overwhelmingly support raising taxes on the richest to invest in care priorities for families. She notes tax giveaways for the wealthiest and biggest corporations don't create jobs. They don't raise average working class people's salaries. Those were lies that Ronald Reagan promulgated that Republicans are still telling here 42 years later. Instead, what tax giveaways do is they pad bonuses for top executives and boost payouts for morbidly rich shareholders. And meanwhile, families are struggling to hold it together. And Joe Biden knows this. I mean, just last month he stood before Congress and declared, if you want to make or can make $1 million or $1 million bucks, that's great. Just pay your fair share of taxes. And Biden has proposed a minimum tax of 25% on billionaires, which should raise $500 billion in just a decade, and wants to invest that money in paid leave, home care, and child care. And this is amazing. New polling from the National Women's Law Center and Moms Rising found that 80% of respondents were supportive of this, of increasing investments in the caregiving agenda by raising taxes on the morbidly rich and big corporations. Women are disproportionately burdened, they note, by our lack of equitable caregiving investments. In stark contrast, and here comes the punchline, in stark contrast, the Republican candidate, former President Donald Trump, has been privately talking about cutting the corporate tax rate even farther, similar to what he did in his 2017 Republican-passed tax bill, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This new survey shows that 2/3 of voters across party lines, both Democrats and Republicans, agree that we need to get rid of that disastrous tax cut for the wealthiest. By the way, that expires this year, or next year, rather, 2025. And that's going to be the next big battle. This is one of the reasons why the billionaires are lining up to put money into Trump's campaign, because he said he's going to extend the tax cuts if he's president, and Joe Biden said he's going to let those tax cuts expire if he wins another term. Since the bill was signed into law, the Trump's massive tax cut, billionaire wealth has increased by more than $2 trillion, a 77% increase, and the child poverty rate in America has more than doubled. Yeah.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls here on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you? A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Back in 2010, when Viktor Orban took over the Fidesz party in Hungary, that party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. What's on your mind here? Richard in Huntsville, Texas. Hey, Richard. What's up?
Hey, hate to be an air hog. I called about not even 2 weeks ago, and I'm the guy that said there's no anti-racist like a reformed racist, and you kind of liked it. And I got a long story for you on how I came there, but that's not why I called. The reason I called, today is Jackie Robinson's day.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's April 15th, 1947.
Yep, exactly. And
he broke the color line.
Exactly. And a few callers later, after I called on the 3rd, I believe it was, of this month, a guy, I think his name was Brian, called in, is trying to pitch some phony BS saying to you that racism is dying off. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. I got something for these arguments, and I use it all the time, and I hope Brian's listening. You think Trent Lott would have to resign today for saying, if we'd listened to you, to Strom Thurmond on his 100th birthday, if we'd listened to you, we'd be better off? He had to resign 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You think he would have to resign today? Hell no. He could campaign on it.
You're
Do you
right.
think Tucker Carlson, yeah, here's another one. Do you think Tucker Carlson, who had gotten behind Cliven Bundy at first, distanced himself immediately when Cliven Bundy started talking racism about the Negro picking cotton? You think Tucker Carlson would have to abandon him now? Hell no. So when people tell me that we're not going backwards racist-wise, those are my arguments.
No, Trump is dragging us into a new Jim Crow.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So thank you for letting me call. I like to call every couple of months so I don't be in such an air hog. But it's just, stuff like that is just pure facts. That's just, you can't argue with pure facts. But yet, I hear it all the time.
Yeah, well said, Richard. Well said. Richard, thank you.
Thank you.
Good talking to you. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? I just got to ask you an education question.
Hmm?
One question I would need to ask you. To override a president veto, how many senators have to vote to override a president veto?
That's a good question. I don't recall. I don't know. I don't remember if it's a simple majority or a 2/3 majority. Let me just look it up real quick.
I was thinking
while you're talking.
I think it was 66. I'm not for sure. I think it was 66. And the other thing. And the other thing. Everybody.
2/3. It takes 2/3 of the House and the Senate.
2/3 of the House and the Senate. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I was thinking. Everybody talking about this election is going to be closed. But there was one gentleman, I can't think of his name. right now. I think it's Adam Letterman, but I might be wrong. He said, but now he said he was going to make his prediction in July and August, and was one person said that Joe Biden will win by a landslide. And they were saying all Joe Biden had to say is that, hey, you going to vote for me or convict these felony.
Yeah, all the polls are showing now that Joe Biden is going to win, and I think it's going to get more and more in his favor as time goes on. But those polls are fairly meaningless when you consider the Electoral College. I mean, this election is going to be decided by the people of probably 3 or 4 states, swing states. And those swing states are fixing to purge hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of mostly black voters off their voting rolls, and they're doing it with the blessing of 5 Republicans, now 6, on the U.S. Supreme Court. So I'm not betting on anything. I mean, this is going to be a real tight race. My friend Greg Pallas thinks Trump's going to win. I don't. I think Biden's going to win, but he's right in the thick of it.
Yes, but I can't. Like I told you, I can't think of the man's name. He's a Jewish guy, and he's been predicting elections ever since. If I'm not mistaken, ever since going back to George Bush 41, and he got them all right. Yeah. And he was the one who predicted that Clinton would lose to Bush. I mean, to that group ball.
Yeah, so, you're not. That wasn't Nate Silver, was it? I don't recall what Nate Silver's prediction was for 2016.
No, not Nate Silver. Not Nate Silver. It's next time I call you, I would have the correct name.
All right, cool. Tyrone, thank you. Thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you.
You're welcome.
Sammy in Longview, Washington. Hey, Sammy, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Hey, I wanted to say, I listened to your piece earlier about Ukraine having been a part of Russia. Yeah, it has been. But, you know, I was born in Helsinki, Finland. My name's actually pronounced Sami.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a different thing.
Yeah, which is the indigenous people of Finland.
Right. Well, the Russians, prior to 1918, Finland was a part of Russia.
Yep.
And when,
Putin knows that,
look,
and he wants it back.
Exactly. And I still talk to my cousins back in Finland, and it's all over the news over there. They're mortified. The Finnish army and the country has figured this out 5-6 years ago. They started put more money towards their military out of the GDP than they ever have in their history as a country.
Yep.
They've seen this coming.
Yep. Well, they're also fortifying they've got a 900-mile border with Russia, if my recollection is correct. And Russia has been
mandatory. Yeah, go ahead. But it's mandatory subscription. They say they can put 1 million men under arms in 30 days. Whether that's true or not, if they could put half, that would be great. The Finns there's always been a saying that even the biggest bear won't eat a big porcupine because, so they're trying to fortify. I wanted to say one other thing about Ukraine, though.
Sure.
Did you imagine the horrendous bloodbath if Ukraine fell and 200,000 to 300,000 Russian soldiers ran over that country? The looting, the pillaging, the
Look at what
murdering,
happened to Bucha. You know, I mean, they raped most of the women in the town. They raped children. They murdered children. There are mass graves in Bucha. That's what happens when Russians take over a Ukrainian city.
And that's on a small scale.
Yeah.
Let's do it on a scale of Kyiv or the other large major cities of central and western Ukraine.
No, these people are
It would be a bloodbath of a mess. I mean, and the folks are withholding their money. Are you kidding me?
I know.
And if you think for a moment that Vlad would stop in Ukraine, he would be so emboldened. Yeah, and if we had a president, Donald Trump, Finland would be next on the chopping block.
You betcha.
Or the Baltics, or Poland. There's no mistake about it.
Yep.
So,
you know, last year, Putin tried to intervene in Finland's politics. I mean, one of the things that he knows is that when European countries experience a large influx of brown-skinned Muslim refugees, it agitates their right, and it actually, it increases the probability of a right-wing takeover of their government. And, we've seen this in a number of European countries. And so what Putin was doing is he was bringing Syrian refugees up to the Finnish border and helping them. He had Russian troops helping, dark-skinned Syrian refugees cross the Finnish border to seek asylum in Finland. And so Finland has now, reinforced that border and put soldiers along it and everything. I mean, they're just, it's a big deal.
Oh, yeah. The Finns are very sensitive about illegal immigration to begin with.
Yep.
So, I'm very, very, very well aware of it. If you want to read a English written newspaper on the internet, it's called Helsinki Times, and they've got articles all the time. It changes almost daily. So if you want to keep up on Finnish news, you can.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Sami, thank you very much for the information and the call. Great talking to you. Appreciate it.
Doing the good.
I'll do
the good fight.
I'll do my very best. Thank you. Rob in New Orleans. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Are you familiar with what are called folk schools in Scandinavia?
Yeah.
I'm patterning an idea off of that called green schools here in Louisiana, promoting dynamic agroecology, including biodynamics, artisanal craft work, adult education.
Oh, it sounds like Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, we've talked about Steiner in the past. But, I was studying recently Abraham Hoffer and Linus Pauling's development of orthomolecular psychiatry.
Yep.
And I really feel like if we're going to fix America, we first got to fix our food. What corrupted corporate food is doing to us on so many levels, not just metabolic syndrome, but also mentally, is something that I think the country needs to get a grip on.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting book out called The Invisible Power Within Foods by a German researcher who shows that foods that are grown biodynamically, or what he calls premium organic, hold a crystalline structure, just like you'd see a snowflake, whereas conventionally grown foods are kind of washed out.
Yeah.
And I think when when people get an understanding of this energetic quality of quality foods, that it will hopefully take off and people will start demanding that.
Oh, there was an absolutely shocking study published about 2-3 years ago. We did a big story about it on this, big treatment of it on this program, showing that the nutrient levels, the vitamin and mineral content and enzyme content of vegetables grown in the United States has dropped by 50% in the last 35 or 40 years. 50%.
Yeah, there's a book called The Better Brain by 2 women psychologists who investigate a micronutrient therapy out of Canada, similar to orthomolecular, that makes that exact point.
Yeah, it's why we only buy organic food, and it's getting easier and easier. I mean, Fred Meyer's, our local chain, kind of big box store that's got a grocery and of course New Seasons and stuff like that. But I get it, that organic food is more expensive than regular food, and a lot of people just can't afford it. And that's one of the things that's driving, the cancer crisis, and the obesity crisis, and the heart disease, and type 2 diabetes crisis. Rob, thank you. Thanks so much for bringing that up.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It is 47 minutes past the hour, and I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Brian in Indianapolis. Hey, Brian, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, how's it going, Mr. Hartmann?
Good.
Are you able to hear me?
Just fine. Feel free to call me Tom, too, by the way. So what's up?
Oh, okay, Tom, yeah. So yeah, I was reaching out because, a couple conversations that I've had in the last few weeks, and I'll say in the last few months with some, right-wing leaning people or, just Trump or supporting people altogether. That, I talk about, the dictatorship thing, and a lot of them say that, we have too many rights already, and they say that they want Trump as a dictator.
Yeah.
And, I've heard it so many times, and I ask them, I'm like, what about me? Don't you know that that's not going to be conducive to anything that, my life or any of us,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think they understand that it's not going to benefit them also.
Yeah.
Because I think they have this fantasy that if they were to take over, that there's this beautiful place in heaven for them or something. And I don't know if the rest of society understands that this is something that these people are thinking. People that we're working with every day, family members. I hear this from my family members.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a interracial marriage, and my wife's family, they're all Republican, and it's just hard to crack them, to get them to understand that what they're wishing for is a very dangerous thing for every single person in this country.
Yeah, they need to read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, although it's like 800 pages, so it's or maybe 600 pages. It's unlikely they'll do it.
We can get a Netflix doc or series, or I'm sure they would.
Yeah, actually, a couple of different people on different occasions have called into the program and pointed to various Netflix and HBO specials about that sort of thing. There was that HBO movie that was really powerful. It was like a 5 or 6 part movie. It was a drama about this Jewish family in New Jersey as a Donald Trump type character takes over America and then starts coming for the Jews. And it was really good. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, but it should be easy to find.
Well, got it. Well, the new movie, the new film that you just saw, Civil War.
Yeah.
As soon as it came out, I was telling my wife, I said, we need a movie like this so that it can people can conceptualize what it will look like if this were to happen. Because a lot of people, they claim we need a civil war. And I'm like, do you think so? Have you seen a civil war, you idiot? It's not like you take over, you take all the money or whatever, and then you go back to normal society. It's no, that country is over with. It's done.
Yeah.
It's done.
By the way, the HBO movie is called The Plot Against America.
Plot Against America.
Yeah,
Roger
I
that.
strongly recommend you watch it, and you may want to share it with your relatives. I don't know, but it's just a I mean, you know, it just kind of goes from nice, sweet America to like really, really ugly America over the course of several episodes, and that movie left a mark on me. It left a real impression on me. And I'm not Jewish. I mean, you know, I would imagine that a Jewish person would really be affected by it. I don't know the religion of your relatives. Odds are they're not Jewish if they're Trump humpers. But yeah, Brian, check it out. The Plot Against America. Brian, thanks for the call.
Roger that. Thanks, Tom.
Yep, good to hear from you. Good talking to you. It's 51 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds, and we'll continue picking up your calls, and the conversation carries on. Nothing new in the trial. Well, actually, I do have something new on the trial, too. I'll share that with you in a minute and a half. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it, and, you know, went to school, and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just had some questions about the trial. Can a judge impart on a juror that anyone who lies through the selection process and is discovered after the trial begins to be removed and also fined or incarcerated? I mean, like you said before, these right-wingers in social media are trying to tell people, get in the jury and lie to get on there and then, you know, side with Trump automatically. And then my other question is, can jurors also be anonymous and see the trial behind a one-way mirror as to protect their own identity? I mean, there's going to be so much focus on this trial, and it's not televised, I don't think, is it?
No, it's not. It's not legal in New York State. I don't know the answer to your first question. My apologies. The second, your second question.
I mean, during the mob years of like John Gotti, jurors were they anonymous? Because, I mean,
no,
if a mobster looking at...
In New York, yeah, on your second question, they're not. I mean, there were times when jurors were anonymous, yeah, in some of the mob trials. They're not going to do that in this case. They're just not giving Trump the names of the jurors, at least so far. But this is where it gets weird. Donald Trump wants to intimidate the jurors. And so this just happened in the last few minutes. I'll just read it. This is from Travis Geddes. He's reporting on the trial. He says, the former president asked Judge Juan Merchan to allow him to stand beside the bench to listen in on one-on-one conversations with individuals who might be tasked with deciding whether or not to convict Trump of falsifying business. In other words, he wants to stand there as the jurors are being interviewed. He wants to stand right next to them, looking right at them from, like, you know, just a few feet away, like, you know, with his mad face on.
That's not going to happen.
Well, we'll see. I mean, the judge, and he also wants to be able to come up to the bench whenever there's a sidebar conversation between the judge and the lawyers. He wants to be able to walk up and listen in on that, too. The judge has not ruled on his request yet, to the best of my knowledge. So, you know, but it sounds to me like he wants to intimidate jurors.
And then one more thing, if Trump is convicted before the election and sentenced, I mean, does that forfeit his right to become president if he wins the presidency, or would he be becoming the president in a prison cell somewhere and giving orders from? I mean, how would that work?
Could be. I mean, the greatest probability, if he is convicted and if he is sentenced, is that he will be sentenced to home confinement. And that home confinement would be wherever his home is. So probably until the election, it would be Mar-a-Lago. And then after January 20th, when he gets sworn in, assuming he wins the White House, which is a big stretch, he would have home confinement to the White House.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is.
Wow.
But I mean, it's not totally exceptional. Oh man, what was his name? The socialist candidate for president in 1914 or 16, whatever the year was, around World War I. Eugene Debs, that was his name. Eugene Debs, Bernie Sanders' hero. He ran for president from jail. He was thrown in jail for protesting against World War I. He violated the Alien Sedition Act of Woodrow Wilson. And he ran for president from a jail cell and got a lot of votes. So, Mark, I'm out of time. Thanks for the call and great questions. And my apologies to George and Kay and everybody else on hold here. We'll pick up your calls tomorrow, but the show is over. Thanks so much for being with us today. Fascinating day. We'll, as I said, stay tuned to this program throughout this week and coming weeks. I will be giving you minute-by-minute, blow-by-blow details of what's going on in that courtroom in New York. You don't need to go anywhere else. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, so get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy.